Welcome to today's session, Leases, Maintenance, and More, using Cityworks to manage properties. Today, we will have the honor of having Dan Purling, our subject matter expert, and Liz Lavelle, who is in our support team, to present this presentation. If you have any questions, please add them to the question panel on the left-hand side of the screen. There will be time at the end of this presentation to answer as many questions as possible. If we don't get to all of those questions, do not worry. They are being recorded, and we will answer all those questions and get them back to you via email. There might be some questions that will require a more in-depth discussion, and we can do that by setting up a meeting. Dan will have his email information at the end of the presentation, so you can contact him. My email information is the same as Dan's, but obviously with my name underscore my last name at trimble.com. So please jot it down and reach to us, and we will be more than happy to continue some of these conversations. If there are no questions from the audience, we'll go ahead and pass it on to Dan. Dan, thank you so much, and let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Gabriella, and thanks everybody for attending. We named this session Leases, Maintenance, and More, using Cityworks to manage properties. And this is something that I think is a little untapped within the Cityworks community right now, but I think we have some space that it could really be an effective solution for these kind of workflows. Now, before we get started, and again, as I'm sure we're maybe all familiar with by now, here's our safe harbor statement. Most of what we're going to talk about today, Liz and I built just within a 15.7 Cityworks environment. But some of it, particularly at the end when we're going to talk about a potential integration between Cityworks PLL and Arcgis Indoors for lease management, that hasn't quite been completed yet. And so don't use any of this in purchasing decisions, and we're not really committing to exactly what we talk about here today. I want to kind of set the stage just with three different conversations that I've had with customers about using Cityworks for managing their properties and their leases. Because they have a little bit of difference, but I think it just kind of really speaks to how flexible Cityworks can be in these workflows. Now, customer A uses particularly and specifically Cityworks PLL for properties that they lease to the public. This doesn't necessarily have to be a building, but even if they purchase a parcel and acquire it and someone's going to build on that parcel and there's maybe a monthly fee associated with it, they use PLL to acquire and then track those pieces of property. Customer B, the shoe is kind of on the other foot, right? So they use Cityworks PLL for properties that they've actually leased from private entities. And the example that we first had when we were having these conversations is there's maybe a private entity in downtown with some nice office space that this particular organization leased so that they could put some city employees down in that location. So kind of a slight difference there. One is the lessee, one is the lessor. And then customer C is really interested. They haven't deployed this yet, but they're interested, and we've had conversations with them about using a PLL case almost as an umbrella to not only manage their leases, but any maintenance of the buildings and the property associated with that particular location. For instance, if they're leasing that office space downtown and a light bulb burns out, or a window gets broken, or landscaping needs to be done, floors need to be cleaned, whatever it is that we almost, Mitch kind of talked about at our conference in 2019 from an Arcgis Indoors perspective, all that building management stuff that could be rolled up to that lease so that these organizations can track and see just how much they're spending on managing these buildings. And potentially tying that into projects within Cityworks AMS, right? So we can associate all these to, say, downtown office space project, and we can see just how much that particular organization has spent. We could do this in a Respond dashboard. We have reporting capabilities that could kind of display this information and then be shared with counsel or whoever, just to make sure that everything's kind of lined up here. So that's just kind of setting the stage, right? And we just set up one workflow of how this might look using Cityworks PLL and then tying into some work orders. And Liz and I put this together really quickly, so it's not super in-depth, but I hope it just kind of gets our wheels turning and maybe leads to some conversation about some other workflows that we could use Cityworks PLL for. Excuse me. So we're going to get started here. Before I play the video, for those of us who maybe aren't familiar, this is Cityworks Public Access. And Cityworks Public Access is a front-facing permit application, or in this case, a leasing application. Maybe I'm driving downtown and I see that there is that office space up for rent, and I want to go and apply to lease it from the organization. And we're looking at this, if I back up, this particular workflow is through the customer A perspective, right? Where we're the organization and we're leasing out property that we own. But we could have similar workflows for that customer B workflow as well. So here within Cityworks Public Access, maybe I log in, or I should say maybe I go to the organization's website and I click a link to get into Cityworks Public Access, and I want to apply to lease this particular property. So I'll go through here and we can see that I have all my different categories for applications I can create. I'm going to select just a general one that we termed lease. And we'll see our map load in public access, right? Everything with Cityworks GIS centric, including public access. You see the map everywhere. And so now if maybe I want to enter in the address as I wrote it down as I was walking past the building, or if I'm familiar enough with the layout of my community, I can select a point on the map and actually bring in that location information, right? It populates automatically there within our address field. I could add a description if I'd like, etc. Now, if we think to, excuse me, if we think to leases that we've all filled out, whether for an apartment or anything of that nature, we need to provide our information, right? So Cityworks Public Access can provide that applicant information. If we want to record property owner information or any different people roles, as we call them, we can do that here. We can collect whatever contact information we need. And I'll just keep this simple and provide my name and my email address. And critically, that email address can be used to send automatic notifications. So if my lease gets approved or my application gets approved, right, I can automatically get an email. Now, maybe here within the related documents section, depending on where we live and the lease rules, I've had to maybe upload like some W-2 statements or a photo of my driver's license. We could all put that in the related documents section. Now, I intentionally left that blank because we're going to take a look once this case is created at some comment functionality that we can let people know they need to upload some more data. And then we can also make payments, right? If there's an application fee or a processing fee, we can use Cityworks Public Access to collect that either through PayPal, Authorize.net, or now at 5.2 Express Bill Pay. And just for some versioning information, this is Public Access 5.2, which works with Cityworks 15.7. And both of those have been released. And now that this has been created, right, I can take a look at all my information. I can see the workflow. I can note that my lease application is currently being reviewed, and that if it's approved, the next step in the workflow would be a renewal, right? I could go in and maybe if I want to stay at the location, I can do so. Now we're going to shift gears, right? So I'm taking off my applicant hat and I'm maybe putting on my property building management department hat. And I'm jumping into Cityworks Respond. And we put together a relatively simple dashboard here where I can see on a map current leases that exist within my department. I'm going to refresh this so we can see the real-time interaction between Cityworks Respond and Public Access. And as I refresh this, we'll zoom in and we'll note that I now have 2 briefcase icons on my map. So there's that application that I created. And we'll also see that application appear in our current leases section there on the right. And now we can start to begin that internal review process. And we'll look at those other 2 cards there at the bottom for our building maintenance work orders and costly work orders in just a little bit. But, right, I need to start processing this application. I need to make sure that the applicant is who they say they are. I need to maybe run a credit check. I need to do all those internal processes before I can go ahead and say, yep, you can occupy this space. And then we can start to look at some of that property management that goes into it, right? If I'm responsible as the organization leasing this property out for building maintenance, changing those light bulbs, cleaning those floors, we can kind of associate that all to our PLL case. So to kick that process off, we'll go to our card over here. And here's the case I just created, number 5. And we'll open it up. And we'll be able to access all the information that was provided during intake, as well as move this thing forward, right? So we can see our workflow. We're going to start with just an application review. We can see my people information. That's exactly who I provided during the intake. And remember, I didn't upload that photo of my driver's license. we can utilize some functionality available within Cityworks Respond to, in kind of an ad hoc way, indicate to the applicant that they need to upload a photo of their driver's license. And then that will automatically send them an email. We can see the address for where this location is, and if we'd like to, we can add the parcel to the case for that GIS information. And we can also start processing, right? I can take a look, and this is maybe a little unrealistic, right? I messaged the applicant that I need a photo of their driver's license, but I went ahead and approved their application anyways. Maybe it's a friend of mine, right? And I'm letting some things slide. So we can approve that application. We can add payments, and now we can really start to see that entire life cycle that Becky and Matt were talking about this morning, except maybe not from a water main perspective, but from a building or parcel perspective, right? We have the PLL case, kind of bringing this lease or building into the fold, and now we're going to create work orders against it. We're going to manage this asset throughout its life cycle. Maybe, for instance, we get a report that a fuse has blown within this building, and we can create this work order directly from the PLL case. We can indicate that we need to go replace the fuse. We can tie it to the asset. We can geocode if we'd like, and we can utilize that AMS work order functionality. And I can simply go and create this work order and have critically the ability to add costs to this, right? So if we're thinking long-term, how much is this building costing me to maintain? This is how we can tie all that together. I can come in and look at my work order and have, again, all that information available to me, but critically we have this add cost button there just a little bit up. We're going to go and we're going to select that, and we can add any labor costs, equipment costs, and material costs that were kind of in play as we went to replace this fuse. And as I'm doing this, if we think back to the cards that were on our dashboard, I created two. One was just an active work orders card. How many building work orders do we have out there that we're working on currently? Two, using our dashboard queries, I set one up that's pretty specific, but just to kind of show the flexibility of the dashboards, I called them costly work orders, where I believe I set it up to work orders that cost over $100 and took over 10 man hours or something like that. And we'll see in the description there. But I want us to remember that because now we'll be able to visualize just how this can be displayed and consumed really quickly as soon as I create this work order. So I added some costs there, $100 in equipment costs and some material costs. And right, here's our costly work orders card, and it's over 10 labor hours and over $100 in equipment costs. So that stays at 1, even though I exceeded the $100 because I didn't add any labor hours. So just kind of showing how the dashboard can react in real time. But we will see, right, that our building maintenance work orders card there jumped up to 5. And that's a relatively brief look, right, a quick run through of just everything that we can kind of envision. And a few other things that we maybe could consider are using the renewal functionality that we have and maybe treating a lease as a business license case. So within Cityworks PLL, we have license renewals. And if after a certain point it's been deemed that the license, or in this case the lease, is worthy of being renewed, we can automatically adjust some dates and kind of do those in bulk with our renewal functionality. So lots of different possibilities here. And again, this is from the lens of the organization leasing the property out. But if the organization was actually leasing from a private entity, we could have a lot of similar functionality and some flexible workflows and different items that we think are really going to be beneficial and are interesting to us. And we'd like to hear what you all think about them. But before we do, I also want to maybe look a little bit ahead at some potential tie-ins with Arcgis Indoors. One of the conversations that we've had about this lease management is specific to airports, but it got us thinking a little bit bigger picture. So if we imagine an airport and maybe a terminal, and there, I live in Milwaukee, so I'm thinking of General Mitchell, which is not a great airport, but anyways, if we just think about that, we have a Leinenkugels, we have a Johnny Rockets, for instance, just a couple of restaurants within the terminal. And if we're looking at this bigger picture, we can use the indoors functionality to quickly access the business license information of those particular organizations, maybe fire inspections, any PLL cases tied to those particular locations. But we can do this instead of tying it to the terminal as a whole. we'd be able to look kind of in an Arcgis Indoors way and see it with a little bit more focus and a little bit more granular. And then another great benefit would be we could use ArcGIS dashboards within a Cityworks Respond dashboard to kind of get at that information even further. Now, full disclosure, this particular video is built off of our current work with Arcgis Indoors, which is specific to work orders. But if we imagine that instead of our little wrench icons, we have little briefcase icons, I think we can start to envision that these could be accessing those PLL cases. And again, we have some great information here just with total costs, average expenditures. How much are these buildings and these units costing us every year? And if we go back to the airport example, maybe it's a shopping center. Each unit within a strip mall or a shopping center requires a different business license, and we can get all that information, how much revenue we're bringing in based on maybe renewal costs, fire inspection costs, that sort of thing. And we can display it and access it, I think, in a really prominent way that shows really well. So I'll go ahead and play this video just to kind of get into that a little bit. It's a relatively quick video. We're going to focus on our map card there in the middle, because we can start to see kind of some unit information, right? Those work orders, or if we imagine that they're PLL cases, they're not all just centered and have 5 work orders that I can pan through. They're very specific to the location within each building. I can zoom in, for instance, to building O. I think this is the Esri campus in Redlands, and I can start to access some of that information, right? I can open my work order, or in this case, a business license, get some high-level information, and maybe I open that up in Cityworks Respond so I can begin to process that. We could also utilize the floor switcher application that we have. So if this is a multi-floored building, I can switch between floors and check out the business licenses, the fire inspections on that second and third floor, really giving me granular location-specific information, but relating it now to leases and business licenses and those fire inspections, and ultimately back to work orders like this, where I can see if this is a leased unit within a building that needed a light bulb replaced. I can access that information and tie it all back to the costs associated with maintaining that asset, that building. And as we can see too, this is all real time, right? So this total now, because I'm zoomed in a little bit further, has automatically adjusted to only include these 4 work orders. So it's a little bit less than it was previously. So if I zoom in on a lease or a work order, we can utilize and leverage that Esri functionality, excuse me, to make sure that we're really getting the data that we need. And so that's kind of our general thoughts. But again, we are hoping that this can maybe be a little bit interactive, right? We're hoping that there's some questions, and even if there aren't questions, that we maybe at least got the wheels turning and could set up some meetings afterwards, because all the meetings that we've had with customers, or even customers who are interested in leasing functionality, have been really productive. And we're interested in if this appeals to you. We're also interested in, hey, have you thought about this previously, and maybe you hit some hurdles that prevented you from doing so? And then we can kind of work with our development team to see if we can make that happen in the future. Because the structure of PLL, just with general workflows and also that revenue component of fees collected, payments made, that really is a whole untapped set of functionality that we think could tie into the whole asset life cycle from when a building is leased or purchased through its management. So we're excited, and we hope that this kind of appeals to you. And I don't know if any questions came in, but maybe while we're having some broader discussion, I'll just leave our contact information up here for both Liz and myself. And like Gabriella said, hers is just Gabriella_Coverdale@trimble.com. But I'll maybe leave that up and hope we had some questions. Otherwise, I have no problem talking for another 10 minutes. So.
Thanks, Dan. This was a great presentation. The only question that popped in is actually more of a general question, but
Sure.
Since you are also the SME for PLL, I'll ask it. Can data group values be automatically updated based on GIS features? Is that something that can be done now, or will it be done in the future?
Yeah, so I'll follow up with Kara on that. I believe that's coming soon. But that general GIS to case data connection is absolutely something that we're really, really close. But I don't want to say that it's out there yet if it's not. But yeah, the general idea there, right, and as we're thinking about maybe a lease, would be, square footage, right? If that's going to be populated when I go and select a building, if maybe that says, okay, this is 10,000 square feet, and instead of during the intake process, I need to manually punch that in, if that's going to determine my fees, my license renewal costs, whatever it would be, we can automatically, or we will be able to automatically populate that case data information as long as it's stored in the GIS. And yeah, I'll just follow up on Kara to be sure on the version for that. And we'll be, but I think that does definitely apply here. So that's a really, really good question. I'm making note of that right now.
Yeah, I think that as we move forward with being so much more GIS centric in the concept of adding information that's coming from GIS into Cityworks for things like leases and maintenance of buildings will become really important, as exactly as the example that you mentioned, right? If there's a square footage change, or if a restaurant decided to expand into the next location, the next locale, do we need to then change that, because that's going to change the cost and the fees and everything else. I really like the idea of incorporating indoors, because as we move into things like the airport that you mentioned, Dan, and places where you have so many locations in a very small area, being able to see that in a map that can definitely specify one restaurant type from another, or whatever other stores that may be, will make it so much easier for that particular agency to do it. So I think there's a lot of potential for this. I really hope that the people who are on the line right now think about it, send us some ideas. Perhaps we can have a brainstorming session with some of our clients as to what else we need to incorporate into this to make it more usable for them.
For sure.
We had a client at another session that was on the real estate department, exactly specifically asking for this. How can we use Cityworks to be able to incorporate everything that I do day to day with all of the properties that I own? Open space, not just the places that have an actual location, but also open space, right? And how do we manage that for parks and things like that, where people may want to,
Yeah, and I think too, just to kind of continue along the GIS centric line of thinking, not only with some of that stuff that's coming soon, like case data information, and also people that we want to automatically bring in, right? So if I'm an applicant at, excuse me, coming soon, and I select an asset, automatically bring in my applicant information based on that particular parcel, we already have a lot of really great functionality that I think would apply to leases and property management, including GIS related fees. So maybe there is an associated historical permit required to renew a license if I have a store in the downtown area. And based on just my XY location, I can automatically add in that fee. So I can say, listen, you want to renew for another year? That's great. You need to pay another however much because you're in this historic district, or a floodplain, whatever it would be. We can also add in specific tasks. So if we're talking about a fire inspection, and maybe we're in a location that's close enough to a fire station that maybe that kind of affects our fire inspection, our fire review, we can automatically add or remove that task as we work towards renewing this particular lease based on where we are geographically. We can display information with map layers right prominently on the screen, and we can really tie everything to that location from a parcel perspective, from an address point perspective, and then tying that with the granular level of accessibility potentially available in the future with Arcgis Indoors, we can really, really get at that information, and I think make the leasing process just another opportunity for a solution within Cityworks.
So then I love this because Kara responded. So case data automatically populated with GIS was released with 15.6 platform, Response 3.0, and Admin 1.0.
I appreciate that, Kara, and I just never want to say, I'm safe harbored out of my mind sometimes. So I'm always trying to cover bases, but thank you, Kara.
And we have a couple of additional questions as well, Dan. For fees, is there any way to customize the lease fees based on an amortization schedule incorporating inflation or something like that? Like each year, the lease payment increases by, say, 3%.
That is, I think that might be one of those conversations that we would want to have a little bit more in depth. Now, our custom fee capabilities are pretty robust, but they're also, for me at least, maybe a little, because of all the possibilities, it takes some testing to make sure everything goes exactly as you want it to go. But maybe with some dates and using some SQL injection to say, okay, we're past January 1st of 2022, and then pulling that increase from somewhere else, we might be able to, but I'd want to have a little bit more of a discussion just to see exactly what they're after before we maybe say we can or we can't. That'd be great though. I mean, if we could write something, that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, and also here we have another one. This is of an informational piece, but I think it's an important one as a FYI for customers to engage with for feedback. We are currently, and this is Esri Canada, we're currently implementing PLL for property management for a customer in Canada. We met with Charlotte, North Carolina, as they have implemented realty property acquisition through to lease and property management quite extensively. So that would be a great one, Charlotte, North Carolina, to talk to in more detail as well.
Yeah, and Charlotte has done a lot of heavy lifting and customization. So I think it's a great look at some possibilities. And really just flexing Cityworks, particularly custom data tables, to the extreme, and maybe looking at that as an example, and then starting some conversations of, okay, we have that possibility, but what also could we do a little bit more out of the box? Because the people at Charlotte are rock stars, and they do stuff that's amazing to me. But just kind of maybe using it as a possibility, and then starting the conversation to see what we could do to get something similar, for sure.
That's awesome. And here we go with another one. Does PLL include mass communication system, mass emails or text that can send to all customers?
That might need some more in-depth conversation too. So I would think we could set something like that up, but it would probably need to be defined as an email group. And then we could map that to an individual kind of headless employee or user within PLL and fire that off. But if this is like a changing group, so okay, we just had a user apply for a case and we want them included in this mass email, out of the box, that isn't really possible, but that one might warrant some further discussion as well. So we can follow up and kind of see some more details on that particular item.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's all the questions that have popped up as of this moment. Thank you so much for a great presentation. This has been great, and I really think that there's a lot of potential, so I really want to pursue that. Thank you for your time. It's been great. Thanks for Kara. Thank you for being on the line and responding to that question. That's awesome. And thank you, Liz, for being here with us as our technical support lead. And Jeremy, thank you for joining us. Jeremy was having a few issues with this technology, but he was able to get it all worked out, and here he is. So thank you. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of Innovate and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully next year. Have a wonderful time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.